Hey guys, and welcome to the BigCommerce 360 Summit. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the Comestri $1 Million Move. And it's generally a topic that I'm getting a lot of conversations around at the moment, and that is headless. It's used by a few of our clients, including some of those leading brands in Australia. I'll present a few of those examples today, one being ADOREBEAUTY, who are quite well known in the industry for their headless architecture. And it's certainly a $1 million move that they've made. So let's start with the why. As many of you would have read, this is a book by Simon Sinek, and it always talks about start with the why. So that's where I figured I'd start my presentation today. And we're going to look at some of the options, I guess, as to how a headless architecture might look for some businesses, and therefore what are the benefits of moving to a more headless architecture. Well, whilst headless isn't for everyone, there is definitely some reasons as to why a headless architecture will work for some organizations. Some would talk a little bit about that true omni-channel experience. Customers are able to find the right product, right time, in the right channel. I've always been told that that's a retailer's utopia when that happens. It gives them a flexible front end. They can start to take advantage of industry trends, utilizing the right components that they have in place. They can start to work with the latest and greatest. So a headless architecture allows you to kind of swap in and swap out components rather than completely throw out your whole architecture and start again. And generally, most people head down a headless path because they are 100% focused on customer experience. What does all this mean? Generally, the things that you're looking for: time to market, cost efficiency, how do I get savings across my IT, how do I increase my conversion rates, and lower my cost of acquisition based on the channel that I'm looking at, I'm after. All right, so that's the why. Now let's look at the what is headless. Well, other than our friend nearly headless Nick there in the background, headless commerce is often defined as an API-led solution where the presentation layer itself is detached from the data or the silos of data that it's being served to it. And so what do we mean by that? Well, in this instance, you could look at different aspects of content, whether it's content, product, whether it's inventory, whether it's coming from a catalog, how I communicate with checkout pages, loyalty, customers, customer service. You know, they can all be reference points for data that is then being served to a front end that is different to an all-in-one S-type system. Right? It means that developers connect to these back-end systems via APIs. And those APIs are either in a single layer, or they can be in multiple layers, or they can be multiple APIs depending on the type of architecture. Typically, a headless environment looks at SaaS-based or cloud-based solutions in a best-of-breed type world, which means I can then choose the tool that's right and fit for purpose without compromise. And we're then starting to see headless being consumed by a number of different applications. So again, it's very easy to point to websites and how websites are built from a headless perspective. But once we've got the whole architecture in place, developing out on mobile apps, developing out for digital marketplaces, we're starting to see things like email and email providers start to consume product information in a headless instance. So when I'm sending out an e-receipt, maybe I want to fill that e-receipt with other additional product data or complementary product data, and I can then send that out through email. But I don't want to have to load my whole email application with all of my products in. We're starting to see the concept of headless coming through in that social commerce, and then it starts to lead to what is nowadays being called composable commerce, and we'll come on and talk about that. So as we go through this, we will look a little bit more about Gartner's view of the world. We're also going to show some practical examples when we start to look at some websites that and/or are built from a pure headless perspective or are starting to consume aspects of headless. Alrighty, so often back to this kind of source of truth. We've been doing a lot of work with Gartner recently, and so I've snaffled some slides from a deck that they've got. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 different architecture approaches in this digital commerce world. There's this commerce-led approach, there's this experience-led approach, and there's a modular API first-led approach. Definitely the commerce-led approach is an approach where it's this kind of all-in-one e-commerce engine that's providing everything. It provides the front end, it provides the content, the catalog, it interacts with the payment gateways, etc. And it is the data reference point. In a more experience-led, we're starting to use concepts and talk to things like the digital experience. So in the experience-led, these digital experience engines or front ends then start to communicate with sections of data through an API layer. And then when we start to hit this modular first environment, it's all about that front end using different APIs and different API calls that are fit for purpose across multiple different data sources. So let's take a look at those in each of the general. As I say, I will reference Gartner in this, but a commerce-led architecture or a commerce-led approach is really focused on a single primary commerce platform. It's the all-in-one solution, generally chosen for feature function. It is what you get, and you just get what you get. It provides a number of options, but by the same time, those options can be somewhat limited because they're based on what's inside the box. They can be internally or externally built. So some people choose an architecture they can still consume and work with internally, or they might use an external agency. And they tend to be platforms that are just enough. So that's the commerce-led approach. As we start to move towards headless, we then start to separate out these components. So as we can see, we've got our use cases in this instance across the top, whether it be online, in-store, kiosk-based, through email, through different communication methods, SMS, etc. And then we're starting to see the separation of front end to APIs to data sources, right? And then when we talk about data sources, it may mean that I've got different data sources for content compared to my catalog, to product data, to inventory, to search, to pricing, promotions, customers, etc., etc. These aren't necessarily, are necessarily being supplied by systems of record, but they're being served into an environment which is typically cloud-based, and they're accessed through this API mediation layer being stitched together at the front end. And so this type of architecture is lending itself to this kind of headless concept. Definitely, we're starting to see this, squeeze into play in market itself. From an ownership perspective within the business, definitely it's a little bit more reliant on those types of organizations that may have some internal IT, some internal dev capability, but also they understand the world of headless and what they're trying to get out of it. Definitely there is an investment here, but once that investment is made, again, the flexibility and the agility then start to kind of come into play. And it's that flexibility and agility which starts to lend itself towards that $1 million move that these organizations are starting to use. So this third level of architecture is really kind of doubling down on that type of approach. We have this presentation orchestration layer that's connected to these front-end systems. And then when we start looking at what the backends are, the backends themselves have their own set of APIs for calls that are being made to the data that they're providing. So in this instance, these content and search, customers, catalogs, etc., they have their own API layer sitting with it. And that API layer itself is being called by this presentation orchestration layer. This is when we're starting to get towards this concept of composable commerce. Why would an organization want to do this? Ultimate flexibility. Productizing their capability. They're definitely best of breed stacks. It means that they can take advantage of the latest and greatest that's on market, in market as it comes through, which means that if my pricing and promotions engine needs to change, I can swap out that component in isolation from all my other components. It's not tied to my complete architecture. And as a result, I'm able to just stay agile in market. If I need to go to new markets, if I need to go to new channels, if I'm going overseas into international, again, I can put together a very quick response. And I can, again, within that agility aspect, I can then start to try, test to get the best of what's required. And so although there is a little bit more investment up front, in the long run, we're starting to see organizations that are really doubling down. A lot of best of breed type scenarios that are coming through, a lot of pure pays are taking this approach. And hence, that's why this modular first API approach comes into play. Alrighty, we're going to start to look at how Comestri then plays into this modular first API approach. And to do that, I'm largely going to be focused on data sources such as the catalog, and I will add in inventory into that instance. Inventory is an important component in there. I'll also talk a little bit about pricing and promotions. As you know, we are product focused, we're inventory focused, and so these two aspects are definitely the area in which we play. So how does Comestri support this headless architecture? Well, a term that some of you may or may not be familiar with is this concept of a materialized cache. Where does that fit in our overall architecture? Well, from a Comestri perspective, we always talk internally about three components. We talk about our PIM, which is our product manager, and in that we also contain pricing and promotions. We've also then got our distributed order management system, and that starts to play towards the inventory aspects of our system. So these are definitely the two core areas that I'm going to point out. So let's start with product data. Well, product data and the journey of product data can start a wee bit before where Comestri starts. So we've got some various inputs here, which may come from ERP, point of sale, whatever your real kind of source of truth is for product data and or inventory. What's special about the Comestri platform is this concept that we have of the channel manager. Channel manager for us is typically served e-commerce integrations. It's typically served marketplaces. It's served search engines. And so in this instance, I'm going to say, well, if we can store information and data within the PIM, and we can provide skinny amounts of data to the e-commerce engine or the search engine, with the main volume of data being passed through our universal channel into this materialized cache, where we're starting to get to is to start to represent. We can provide just enough information to the e-com, we can provide just enough information for the search so that they can continue to operate, aka put together catalogs, put together their categorization aspects, offer category pages, offer images, offer inventory to make sure the product is on sale. But then when we're in this PDP at the orchestration layer, that's when we want to call on, through these APIs, the bulk of the information that's then sitting in this materialized cache. Right? And again, this materialized cache is an infinitely scalable data source that is being fed through APIs out to the front end. So these calls on demand happen as we click through our e-commerce space into the PDP. The PDP, when it wants to paint the full page, and then call on whatever data is required coming out of that materialized cached environment. What do we mean by that? Well, we can then start to get to things such as additional video content, additional imagery. We can start to get to product handling instructions. We can start to get to material, fabrication, how things are put together. You can start to talk a bit about the manufacturing process. Whatever is required from the front end to offer a better user experience can then be called in an on-demand instance. And that's when we're starting to think about things like web, we're starting to think a little bit about mobile, point of sale systems in store, kiosks in store, can all have a different representation of that kind of data as it comes through this presentation orchestration layer. So that's the product journey. So as a representation of that, it then starts to mean that I can choose the way in which I want to present that data to specific customers through whichever channel or means that I then want to present that. From an inventory perspective, it's slightly different. Inventory comes into our OMS. Inventory is then served out through our delivery APIs to again be consumed at the front end on an on-demand basis. And this starts to happen when we start to then start questioning around, where is my stock? Which stores are my stock in? Are they only in DC? Is it available for delivery? Which items are available delivery? Which SKUs are available delivery? Which SKUs are available from a click and collect perspective? And we definitely work with clients that have different rules around different products, different SKUs, different SKU types. The delivery APIs themselves also then start to give you, if I'm going to ship this thing between different postcodes, what's the calculation of cost going to be between those postcodes? And there is a lot of calculation that happens in the chat between this delivery API and the front end when you're on the PDP. What I think is also really interesting is that you can then add, and typically a consumer would then go and add a number of items to their cart. Once those items are in that cart, the checkout page itself then has to make a decision as to whether all of those items in the cart are still available under the premise in which they were added to cart. What I mean by that is I've added 1 item, 2 items, 3 items from a click and collect perspective, But then I may add a fourth item that isn't actually available right now for click and collect. So the checkout then needs to make a decision as to whether or not it's available within 60 minutes, 24 hours, or if it's available for click and collect altogether. And so that call in itself from the checkout also hits our delivery APIs to be able to ask the OMS, with the inventory that I now have in my cart, is this all available, again, under the buying premise that the consumer wants? And therefore, what information do I now need to give to that consumer? It's a very consumer-led approach. So in summary, we've got these three approaches: this commerce-led approach, experience-led approach, and this modular API-led approach. Here's a summary slide. I won't go too much into this. As I say, organizations will pick and choose which one they really want to go down the path of based on the level of complexity that they can consume as a business and what they want to build, what they want to buy. So getting into some examples. Well, we've talked a little bit about ADOREBEAUTY. So I'm going to look at ADOREBEAUTY and I'm going to show you some examples of their front end, especially when it comes to their product data, their product experience, and how they manage pricing within the content which gets delivered to the front end. So switching across to a browser, let's take a look at the ADOREBEAUTY website. So as we know, these are a big consumer of BigCommerce. So this is a extremely well-built headless architecture. I do know Gareth pretty well from the CTO perspective. Anyone wants to reach out to me to talk to Gareth about what he's put together here, I'm sure he's always open to talking about it. So what I'm going to show you here is an instance where we can look for certain products. You'll see that they have an extraordinary amount of data to feed to their front end. That data itself comes from different content systems. It comes from our PIM. It comes from varying sources. And so, pretty neat navigation up here. But I think where I'm going to start is to look at and search for a product called Skin Institute. And what I want to show you, because what I've always thought was really cool, again, lots of filtering choices, lots of products on page. But the thing that always impresses me about their site is the blend of content and product that they then put together on a page. So here we are sitting on a category page, but I'm also starting to consume blog articles and different content that's being served to me from a different environment. And then what I think is always quite cool about this site is that when I then go and look at specific instances of content, and in this one, we've got this, which Skin Institute cleanser is right for me right now. I can then scroll through the content, read the content, but I'm also being served product. And so this blend of content coming from his CMS system and product being provided by the PIM, pricing that's then coming out of our system, I think is really neat. And as I say, this site is so well put together, you can even shop the article, which in itself then starts to give you just the products that are being referenced within this article. So this is a great example of where I can then start to use my front end in a headless environment to call on multiple different data sources to then start to blend this information together. Each of those data sources is best of breed. And so the aspects of which the consumer is then seeing this is then starts to be very right for the channel that I want. What's always amazed me about ADOREBEAUTY is just how much content that they do have that surrounds the product sets that they have. So I think that's a great example there of blending different data sources together into a headless architecture. And as I say, there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes to get to this. And you'll see even when we then start to drill down into different products, we can go and look at the full details of this. What I'm proud to say is that a lot of this content in here is then being served by the PIM. They have an extraordinary amount of images, extraordinary amount of aspects on this front end, all the way through from product info, why we love it. There's a bucket load more content that sits below that, how to use it, and what the ingredients are. And as I say, even the descriptions and the nature that sits behind them means that they've got content and articles that are then associated with these ingredients. So again, a great example there of what can be used in a headless environment to blend different data sources together for the user experience. Okay, so just lastly, just looking at a slightly different example of inventory being called to our delivery APIs, which I think is another interesting use case. Slightly different. This is definitely on a per SKU basis. So on 99 bikes, I can go and look at some tires. These are my favorite, the Conti GP5000s. I can choose an option. I can add some quantities. And then when I look at these delivery options in this instance, I can check for click and collect, in which case I can add in my suburb and it will search for that. And it will tell me Brookvale, Artarmon, Bondi are all in stock. Happy days. I am going to add this to my cart and you'll see that I now have items in my cart. So then if I go and look at the cart experience in this instance, it will say I've got my 2 Conti tires in here. There's all my details. It's available for click and collect. It's the option that I want to select. Come on, Mr. Page, keep loading. Here we go. I'm going to pick it up from the Brookvale store. So I've selected my store. I've selected Brookvale. You'll see that Brookvale is now ready and I could proceed to check out and go through and pay for it. But actually, I'm just going to now go and add in a reasonably expensive bike where I will choose the option of medium, even though it won't fit for me. I will ask, you'll see that this is a bike not available for delivery. These guys cannot ship bikes, it's against their regulation, but I can look for it in a click and collect instance. I can still search for that store. It will tell me that it will be available as a special order for $5. So I can still select that option and add it to cart. And now let's go and look at our cart experience. So as you'll see, my cart is no longer available for delivery. It is available for click and collect from Brookvale. And you can see that Brookvale will be ready by the Friday, the 20th of August. So that's a week out. I can always change that. So let's go and search for a different store and look at Bondi. And it will now change and say, Bondi, this is going to be ready by, again, Friday, the 20th of August. So clearly they are going to have my tires in stock, but they're probably going to ship from the DC to that store this bike so that it's ready for next weekend. And then I could proceed to check out, pay my $4 and a bit grand, happy days. But that's a very different example where specific products have specific options focused on them, and they are different, and therefore the experience is different between what the PDP looks like compared to what the checkout looks like. So there we have it. Some examples from our clients where we're starting to look at product data that's being pulled from a headless environment, from a headless architecture, served on demand, and blended with that content coming from a different system. And then we've looked at some various options from an inventory perspective, which really enable then on a per SKU basis, what the click and collect experience might be, what the ship from store experience might be, what the delivery options might be for different products in inventory. And so that's how, in our instance, Comestri then starts to support that headless architecture from different data silos being presented to a front end. Not much more to say really, other than this is a little bit who Comestri is. We're definitely focused on the product journey, the inventory journey, the orchestration of that into different channels. Happy to talk through this if anyone's interested to know more about the examples which we presented today, or if you are interested in a headless architecture and you want to talk to us, again, more than happy to share our thoughts. And that in itself is our view of a $1 million move, presenting some different options for some organizations there where their e-commerce trajectory has taken off in recent months and weeks and years, and 2 instances where they've got some really interesting kind of headless scenarios in play. That's enough for me. I'm Ben. My details are in this deck, and if you want to reach out, feel free to. Thanks very much, and thanks very much again for the Big Commerce hosting this session. Appreciate it. Ciao.